We're Bob and Penny Lord, and we have a very special super saint to share with you today.
Saint Rita of Cascia is a role model for women of our generation. There is nothing that any woman has experienced that Rita has not known. She was an obedient daughter, a faithful wife, a battered wife, wife of an alcoholic and woman chaser, a widow, a single parent who lost her children when they were young. She was a nun who was unwanted by her community. She is considered the saint of the impossible.
God never leaves us alone. When he feels it's time to take one saint home, he raises up another to take her place. Rita was born in the year 1381, the year after St. Catherine of Siena died.
And in other times of doubts and heresy, our generous and loving God gave us an army of saints to keep his promise that hell would not prevail against his church. Rita was to become such a saint.
Was born at the end of the medieval era, before America was discovered by Columbus. She was born at Roccaporena, a nearby small village. Her parents, Antonio Lotti and Amata Ferri, baptized Rita here in Cascia, in the parish of St. Mary.
Born of a very devout mother and father who were called by the villagers Jesus Christ's peacemaker, it would appear from infancy that God had very special plans for Rita. There is a tradition in Roccaporena that as an infant, while she slept in a basket in the fields where her parents were working, white bees swarmed around Rita's open mouth. Not only did the bees not sting her, but witnesses said they saw the bees drop honey into her mouth without her uttering a cry of warning to her parents.
Her parents told the people of Roccaporena such episode. They thought to a sign gave by God. Here on the wall you see little holes. Here live the wall bees, a very special kind of bees. They are called the bees of St. Rita. I have seen them many times, especially in the month of May.
Pope Urban VIII, learning of the mysterious bees, requested that one of them be brought to him in Rome. After a careful examination of the bee, he tied a silk thread around it, then set it free, only to have it later discovered in its hive at the monastery in Cascia, 138 kilometers away. And so the tradition of the bees began.
Her parents, without ever having learned how to read or write, taught Rita from the time she was a child all about Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and some of the better-known saints. Rita, much the same as her counterpart, St. Catherine of Siena, was never schooled to read or write. Whereas St. Catherine was miraculously given the grace to read by our Lord Jesus, St. Rita's only book was the crucifix. But as Rita grew into a young girl, she dreamed of giving her life to Christ as an Augustinian nun. Her parents, much advanced and aged, felt that she would be more secure married to a fine man. It never occurred to Rita to question them. Paolo Ferdinando as a husband was at best a poor choice, but Rita, the obedient daughter, married at 12 years of age and began 18 years of pure hell.
Rita never prayed for her husband to love her, to be kind, to cease drinking or being abusive as a result of the drinking, or to remain at home with her and their 2 sons born of their marriage. She prayed for his soul unconditionally, that he would give his life over to Jesus and be converted. After many long years and spilled tears of crying out for mercy for her husband, Rita's prayers were answered. Paolo was converted. He repented his past, begged forgiveness from her and his God, and became a model husband, father, and Christian. He gave up his old ways and old friends, spending his time now with Rita and with their 2 sons.
But although Paolo had changed his ways, his enemies had not. One night as the hours ticked away, Rita really began to worry. Paolo had not come home. She would not have worried about the old Paolo, but she knew the new Paolo had not turned his back on Jesus, not on her or their boys. So although she tried her best, she could not overcome the fear that was to become a reality. Suddenly, all the years of dreading a knock on the door and the final, fatal words, "Your husband has been murdered," came crashing down on her. Early in the morning, her husband's lifeless body was brought to her. She held the husband she had waited so long for, the horrible years no longer even a memory. And she sobbed as if her heart would break. The prodigal son had returneth, and he was dead.
Her only consolation was that she knew he was with the Lord. He had to be, didn't he? What little solace she had was quickly destroyed. Her sons had been more influenced by the father's former violent nature than that of his brief conversion. And so they swore to avenge their father's death, a vendetta. No amount of pleading on the part of Rita would dissuade them. An eye for an eye. The murderers had to die as their father had died. Rita got back down on her knees to her faithful and loving Lord. She prayed, "Lord, please save their souls. If they are to lose their souls, please take them." The Lord answered her prayer. They were stricken by a fatal illness. As Rita ministered to their fever-racked bodies, she spoke gently to them of Jesus. She repeated the prayer of Jesus on the cross. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Their hearts of hate turned into hearts of love. They forgave their father's murderers before they died.
Her husband is gone. Her children are gone. The fears her parents had voiced 20 years before have now come to pass. Rita is alone in the world.
She asked to enter this monastery of St. Mary Magdalene. You see around you the old monastery, a marvelous place where lived about 12 sisters of the Augustinian order. But they didn't want to accept Rita. There were the political and social fightings among the families. She was a widow, and it was dangerous to accept her in the monastery. For all that reasons, the sisters didn't accept Rita.
Mother Superior had been very adamant in her objections. They would not accept widows. They only accepted virgins in the order.
All Rita's pleading fell on deaf ears.
I wonder how Satan must have tortured Rita at this point. Was it because your husband was so mysteriously murdered that you are unacceptable, not holy enough? Or could he have attacked with, what kind of a mother do you think they judge you to have been? What kind of upbringing did your sons have that they would even think of committing so grave a mortal sin as a vendetta? Have you ever judged you were rejected by the church? It's almost like the Lord himself does not want you. But Rita did not turn her back on her church. She turned to the head of the church, Jesus Christ. She knew he would never let her down. Although she did not always know or understand his ways, she knew he loved her, and she trusted in that love.
And so again, the Lord came through with a miracle. After allowing St. Rita to be rejected 3 times, the Lord answered her prayers, intervening in a physical way to prove to Rita that he was with her, that he had never left her. Late one night, she awakened out of a deep sleep. She heard her name called, "Rita, Rita." She got up and looked all around her. It was still. Nothing was moving. She peered through the dark of night. There was no one there. Who could have called her in the middle of the night? Perhaps it was her imagination. She went back to bed, but not to sleep. Again, she heard her name called, Rita, Rita. This time, she shot up out of bed and looked all around her little cottage. She was alone. She knew something was going on, but she couldn't figure out what it was. She returned to bed, only this time she prayed fervently to our Lord Jesus. For a third time, she heard her name called, Rita, Rita.
She jumped out of bed, ran to the door, and opened it. Standing outside was St. Augustine, St. Nicholas of Tolentino, and St. John the Baptizer. They motioned her to follow them. She ran through the streets of Roccoporena in pursuit of the three saints, up the hill to the highest peak in town where Rita always went to pray. She knew our Lord Jesus was answering her prayers, and his answer was yes. She felt herself lifted into the air, high above all the mountain peaks, floating gently towards Cascia. She could feel the soft spring breeze caress her cheeks and face. It was as if all the angels of heaven were kissing her. She found herself above the monastery of St. Mary Magdalene in Cascia, and she went into ecstasy.
She came out of her ecstasy inside the choir of the chapel of the Augustinian monastery. It was quiet. She was all alone in the pre-dawn hours of that spring day. She knelt there in prayer, praising our Lord Jesus and thanking him for what he had done. When dawn came, she was greeted by the rustle of habits of nuns coming down for morning prayers. She heard the sounds of the huge keys turning in the locks of the door. The Mother Superior, who always kept the keys on her person, opened the heavy door with the help of several nuns. They looked at Rita kneeling inside in prayer and gasped. It was impossible for her to have gotten into the chapel unless... The Mother Superior, trying to compose herself from her shock and in an effort to retain order among the other nuns, said to Rita, "You don't think because the Lord has given you this special gift that you're eligible to enter this order, do you?" Rita replied, "No, Mother, I know I'm not worthy enough."
She was 36 when she received the habit of the Augustinian order, and she made the vows of obedience, chastity, and poverty. You see here the well. The abbess ordered Rita to take the water and to take the water to a dry stick. She wanted to prove the obedience of Rita. And she did so. With patience, humility. She went to the well, she took the water, and she did so every day, for months. The dead stick flourished, became a vine. The vine of St. Rita.
Look at it, it's still bearing fruit. Looks like grapes. Yes, it is. It is grapes. They need
White grapes. We made as well a powder with that wine, the powder of St. Rita. It's a special devotion here in Italy.
faith.
Is that
Faith.
500 years old, are you telling me? That,
Oh, yes.
That particular...
The same one.
How say radice? Radice. The root. The root.
Yes.
The
Oh, the
roots.
root. Yes.
The roots are 500 years
Okay.
old.
And they're looking at her watering a dead stick. He didn't say that the abbess told all the other sisters that she had ordered her to do that. So we're not only dealing here with obedience. Could we be dealing under obedience with the little humiliation? The other thing, did we ever
Usually, real obedience, as I know in my religious life, I received twice obedience is to do. There is always a bit of humiliation. Always.
Do we hear that? Now, another thing I want you to think about as you're going through her life is that everyone else is young. She's older. Even I'm sure her novice mistress is younger than she is. She's been the queen of her kitchen. She's had her own kitchen, her own house, and we women who have our kitchen, boy, we like everything just so we know where the pots are, we know how to make this, we know how to make that. Now she's under strict obedience, like a child. She must obey the cross.
And she must say yes to that.
The cross.
She did say yes to that.
Have you ever had someone else in your kitchen?
Oh, yes.
And they know more than you do?
Your mother-in-law.
It's a cross. It's a cross. They make it better than you do, you know? See, it's little things, but it's the, see, if you don't look at the everyday living out of the life of St. Rita, you miss the boat.
Then it becomes romantic. It becomes very romantic, not realistic at all. But there's a tremendous amount of realism.
It's the making of a saint. And if you look at the realism of it, you can be a saint. Not easily, but you can be a saint. One night, Rita had a vision. She saw a tall ladder leading heavenward with Jesus at the top. He was calling her to him, to that perfect mystical union with him that could only be achieved through her daily obedience to the life he had chosen for her, her life in him as an obedient nun. He would be her teacher, her strength in her weakness, her companion, her love in her otherwise loveless life. He would be her very life. With Jesus to sustain her, St. Rita chose the most mended and worn clothing for herself, barely eating enough to maintain her strength. Word of her holiness got outside of the monastery, and people started to talk of the saint in their midst.
In 1443, a great preacher came to Cascia during Lent and gave a very passionate sermon on our Lord to the nuns. Rita was so moved that she returned to the monastery and began to pray before a fresco of Jesus crucified. She humbly asked for a part of his suffering on the cross because she knew she was unworthy to share his full passion on Calvary. A thorn fell from the beloved head of our Lord Jesus and pierced the forehead of St. Rita. She immediately began to bleed profusely, and the wound that kept bleeding has been accepted by all as the gift of the stigmata of our Lord.
In the case of most holy people who have been graced with the stigmata, like St. Francis of Assisi and the saintly Padre Pio, the fragrance exuded from the holy wounds smells like a beautiful perfume from heaven, more pleasing even than that of flowers. With the wound of St. Rita came humiliation, estrangement, and isolation. The wound had such a putrid odor that she had to suffer the ostracism and rejection of her fellow nuns, who at best feared it might be infectious and at worst could not bear the smell. She spent the next 15 years alone, suffering more and more excruciating physical pain. But although she was isolated from her community, far away from any of the consoling companionship of other nuns, she had the consoler. Instead of looking toward herself and her pain, she focused on Jesus and his crucified head of thorns. And all the thorns in her life were turned into roses of love by her Lord as she offered them to him.
In 1450, Pope Nicholas V declared the First Holy Year, proclaiming Rome once and for all the center of the Christian world and of our faith. Our Lord wanted to unite his church, to end the scandal of division and dissension caused by self-interest and result in schism. And so he inspired the Pope to initiate this holy year, and unite he did. All the religious of Italy, as well as pilgrims from all over the world, converged on Rome. The nuns of Cascia were also planning a pilgrimage which was not to include Rita. Knowing and understanding the reasoning behind this, the bleeding and the festering and the terrible smell, she nevertheless did not take it lying down. She went to the big boss. She prayed that her wound be temporarily healed, that there be no external signs, only the internal pain of the wound to remain. Her petition was almost immediately granted. The wound disappeared, and St. Rita was on her way to Rome with the other nuns.
The pilgrimage to Rome was one of suffering and sacrifice. The walking and living on the road at times more than the little band of pilgrims from the monastery of Cascia could bear. But always there was the patient, never complaining joy of St. Rita, now in her late 60s. It encouraged and sustained them. The highlight of the trip was to be the canonization of St. Bernardine of Siena. Little did the nuns with St. Rita know that 400 years later, this humble nun in their midst, with similar pomp and ceremony, would likewise be recognized by Holy Mother Church by being raised to the communion of saints. The wound did not bleed or reveal any evidence it had ever existed during the entire pilgrimage, but upon their return to the monastery, not 5 minutes passed when the wound opened with all its accompanying signs. Rita was again quarantined into seclusion with her beloved Lord.
All the years of fasting, subsisting on so little, the nuns judged she lived solely on the Eucharist, began to take a toll on St. Rita. After 4 years of intense suffering, she lay dying, a last winter on earth, the land she had loved so dearly covered with a blanket of snow. That although Rita had lived the life of an obedient nun these last years, the wife and mother asked the Lord for a sign that her husband and sons were with him in heaven. Turning to a relative who'd come to see her, she said, "I would like a rose from my garden at home." As the thick snow of winter would have killed any roses that had survived the bitter cold, her cousin was heartsick. Judging Rita was delirious and she would never see her alive again, the relatives sadly returned to Rocca-Porena.
Wearily approaching St. Rita's garden, what should she discover but a rose shooting up from the soft white mound of earth? No sooner had the relative returned to Rita with the rose, affirming her husband was in heaven, then Rita asked for 2 figs from her fig tree at home, another impossible feat for the middle of winter. Now, no longer doubting, the relative rushed off and joyfully returned with the 2 figs. Rita smiled. Her Lord had generously answered her prayers. Her son and her husband were with Jesus in heaven.
We are convinced that God flourished the roses and figs because God had forgiven the husband and the sons of Rita. For that reason, here in Italy especially, the people that venerate Rita want to bless the roses to honor her. She died the 22nd of May, 1457. The tradition wants that the bell, you see the bell, sang alone when St. Rita died. The angels took her on heaven.
The ugly wound she had borne uncomplainingly over the years healed as she breathed her last, only to be replaced by a ruby spot. A strong fragrance, sweet and heavenly, poured forth from where the wound had been, replacing the stench she had lived with those many years. The fragrance continued over many years, for St. Rita was never buried.
The coffin was made by Paul of Visso, a masterpiece of the Umbrian art. The body of St. Rita was kept inside that coffin. She was venerated as the saint of the impossible, the saint that receives from God the most great graces.
Veneration to this gentle lady began almost immediately. Down through the centuries, the power of the intercession to St. Rita has been confirmed by a multitude of miracles. Most of these have been granted to those on the brink of despair, who felt their petitions were impossible. St. Rita has been given the name Saint of the Impossible. While the favors granted to her have not been solely to women in distress, she has become known as the woman saint. There are those, ourselves included, who believe that St. Rita is one of the most touchable saints for the women of today.
Somewhere out there, many readers are searching for help, but don't know where to look. Help is there. It has always been there. We have just been looking in the wrong places. Till today, when you visit St. Rita, there is a feeling of family. She is one of us. Here, in a glass urn, her body incorrupt after almost 600 years, lies our sister, our saint, a woman of our time, honored by God and her brothers and sisters. And I love her and thank God for the gift of her to remind me what I can do.
One of the most amazing things for us is to see the tens of thousands of women who go every year to the shrine of St. Rita in Cascia in petition and in thanksgiving.
St. Rita of Cascia is known as one of the most powerful women in our church. We thank you for being with us today, for allowing us to take you to Italy, up to the top of the mountain, so we can venerate and share with you the life of this woman in our church. God bless you. We love you. Write us at the address on our screen or call us in the United States at 1-800-633-2484.
We love you.